I'm Alessia Pratt, 38, and I worked my way up from enlisted to Rear Admiral. For years, I bent over backward to earn my father's respect, visits, repairs, even quiet financial help. But when he laughed during my wedding vows and muttered I'd never be anyone, I made a choice that changed everything. Ever been dismissed or disrespected by someone you spent your life trying to make proud? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive in, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to claim your worth after being underestimated, tap like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries and quiet payback. Because what happened next caught everyone off guard. My name is Alessia Pratt, and I've spent most of my life trying to earn a nod from a man who never learned how to give one. Growing up, my world revolved around my father, Captain Walter Pratt, USMC. He was the kind of man who didn't believe in using two words where one would do. Orders were barked, expectations were implied, and emotions were non-existent. My earliest memories are the smell of boot polish, the clink of dog tags on the kitchen counter, and the way my mother would go quiet when he came home in a bad mood. Which was often. We lived on base most of my childhood, bouncing from one posting to the next every 2 to 3 years. No roots, no real friendships, just the routine of packing up, starting over, and trying to read the temperature of my father's silence. He wasn't cruel, exactly. He didn't hit, didn't yell often. But he didn't hug either. Never said, "I'm proud of you." Never asked how school was. He didn't have to. His approval wasn't something you were given, it was something you chased. Or at least I did. By the time I was 9, I had memorized his rituals. Polishing his shoes before inspection days. Prepping his uniform the night before a promotion board. I'd sit on the floor and hand him pins while he double-checked every crease. He never said thank you. But I clung to the slight softening in his shoulders as proof that maybe, in his own way, he appreciated it. I followed him everywhere I was allowed. Saturday mornings at the range, where I'd watch him correct younger Marines with sharp, efficient movements. Sunday chapel in stiff uniforms. And sometimes, if he was in a good enough mood, I'd sit beside him in the garage while he repaired the old Jeep he never let anyone else drive. I didn't know what half the tools were called, but I knew better than to talk too much. Just being there felt like enough. When I was 13, I joined JROTC without even asking. I knew the answer would be a grunt at best. I made cadet lieutenant colonel by junior year. Straight A's, perfect drill. 3 years as commander of the unarmed exhibition team. My instructors pulled me aside once to say, "You know, your father never comes to our events. Does he know how well you're doing?" I just nodded. Of course he knew. He had to. At 17, I told him I planned to enlist in the Navy. I expected something, an argument maybe, or at least a flicker of reaction. Instead, he stared at the TV and said, "You'll see it's not for everyone." Not, "Good luck." Not, "I'm proud of you." Just that. Like I was signing up for a summer internship I'd flake on halfway through. Boot camp was a blur of sweat and shouting, but I thrived in structure. The harder it got, the more I dug in. When I graduated from A school near the top of my class, I sent him a photo in my dress whites. No reply. Not even a thumbs up emoji. When I made petty officer, I called him. He didn't answer. My mother texted later, "Your dad's proud. He just doesn't say it." But he never said it. Not once. Still, I kept calling. Kept visiting when I was on leave. Fixed the leaky sink in the basement. Paid for their new washer when the old one finally gave out. Brought groceries. Took my mother to her checkups when he didn't feel like driving. All while moving through deployments, advanced quals, officer candidate school. Eventually, I earned my commission. He didn't come to the ceremony. One year, I surprised them for Christmas. I just made lieutenant commander, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd care. When I walked through the door in uniform, he looked up from his paper and said, "You could have called first. Your mother hasn't cooked." No mention of the bars on my collar. No handshake. Just irritation. My mother hovered in the kitchen, always trying to fill the silence. She'd press leftovers into my hands, ask polite questions about my ship or the weather in Bahrain. But the conversations were one-sided. My father barely looked at me. If I tried to talk about work, he'd change the subject. If I mentioned rank, he'd scoff. They're promoting everyone these days. Back in my time, even among his old buddies, men I ran into over the years at VA events or base ceremonies, he never brought me up. Once, at a reunion I attended unofficially, someone introduced me to a retired master sergeant who'd served with my dad. Walt's kid, huh? I didn't know you were Navy. He said you were in grad school or something. I just smiled and nodded. What was the point? It wasn't just that he didn't celebrate me. It was that he actively downplayed me. If someone at church asked how I was doing, he'd say, "She's busy with her thing." Never lieutenant commander. Never serving overseas. Just her thing. I tried telling myself he was just old-fashioned. Maybe he thought it was humility. Maybe he didn't know how to be proud of a daughter in uniform. But the truth was simpler. He didn't see me. Not really. Not as someone who'd followed in his footsteps and maybe, just maybe, gone farther. Over time, I stopped expecting anything. When I was up for commander, I didn't bother mentioning it. When I bought my first home with deployment pay, I didn't send photos. I still sent money when the roof leaked. Still fixed the water heater. Still showed up on birthdays, out of habit if nothing else. But something had shifted. I was no longer chasing. And then I met someone. Mark, an Air Force pilot, thoughtful, steady, the kind of man who asks how your day was and actually listens. He proposed in the least dramatic way possible over takeout, in sweatpants, on a Sunday night. I said yes without hesitation. When we told my parents, my mother squealed. My father said, "You sure he can handle you?" It was a joke, I think. But even then, the sting landed right on target. We decided on a military ceremony, small, respectful, with a few close colleagues from both our branches. I kept the guest list tight. My father grumbled about the lack of extended family. My mother tried to smooth it over. You know how your father is. He doesn't like to travel. They only lived 2 hours away. The week before the wedding, I sent out the final schedule. Ceremony. Reception. One formal recognition for active duty guests. Nothing extravagant. Just tradition. He didn't reply. The night before the wedding, I got a text from my mother. "Your dad's still coming. Don't worry. He's just not a fan of all the pomp." I stared at the message for a long time. Pomp. That's what it was to him. Not years of service. Not the people who'd bled beside me. Not the institution that shaped both of our lives. Just pomp. Still, I was prepared. Or I thought I was. But nothing could have prepared me for what he did at the ceremony. Or what happened after. Let me know when you're ready for part 2. By the time my promotion orders came through, the silence between us had grown louder than any argument could have. I was officially a Navy commander. I'd been serving for over 15 years, led 2 combat deployments, managed teams under fire, and been entrusted with operational command authority most officers my age hadn't touched yet. The message came through while I was on base, and I stood there for a long moment just holding the envelope. My hands didn't shake, but my breath caught. Not because I doubted my own worth, I didn't, but because I knew exactly what it would mean to share the news with my father. That night, I called him. He didn't pick up. I tried again 2 days later. Nothing. Finally, I texted my mom, let Dad know I made commander. She responded the next day. "That's good news. Congrats." That was it. No call. No card. No mention the next time I saw them. Not even a quick nod from him. I wasn't expecting a marching band, but the absence of anything at all, was its own kind of statement. You would think a man who spent 30 years in the Marine Corps would understand what making 05 means. But that was the thing about my father. He understood perfectly. He just didn't care to show it. When I told them I was getting married, his reaction was just as indifferent. We were sitting in the living room, the same stiff-backed chairs, the same dusty mantle full of fading pictures from his service years, and one high school graduation photo of me shoved behind a framed wedding photo of my brother. "I'm getting married," I said plainly. He didn't look up from his crossword. "Don't let it ruin your career." That was it. No congratulations, no questions about who he was or how we met. My mother asked polite follow-ups. What's his name? What does he do? But only because she felt obligated. My father kept scribbling, as if I just mentioned a weather update. I didn't tell them about the proposal. I didn't show them the ring. I didn't mention that Mark had moved across the country for me, or that he'd spent the last year supporting my schedule, rotating his own deployments around mine. They didn't ask. I didn't offer. We drove out to visit them a few months later, hoping maybe some time would soften things. Mark was the type of man who gave people the benefit of the doubt. He grew up in a big, warm Irish-American household where affection was expected, not earned. He brought a bottle of wine and shook my father's hand with both of his. My dad barely glanced at him. "So, you fly a desk or a plane?" "KC-135s, Mark replied. "Aerial refueling." Dad muttered, already walking back toward the kitchen. "Used to have real aircraft in my day." I tried to laugh it off, but even Mark looked thrown. "Was that a joke?" he asked when we were alone later. "No," I said. "That's just how he is." The visit lasted 36 hours. We stayed at a nearby hotel instead of sleeping in the house. My mother pretended to be confused by that choice, but I knew she understood. On the second night, while Mark and I sat on the porch watching the streetlights blink on, my father came outside. He stood for a moment, then lit a cigar and said without looking at me, "You still trying to play soldier?" I didn't reply. He took a long drag. "You gonna wear your uniform at the wedding?" "Yeah," I said. "Mark will too." He grunted. "Oomph. You two gonna salute each other after you cut the cake?" That one stung more than I wanted to admit. Mark squeezed my hand under the table. I said nothing, and after a few more minutes, my father went back inside. After we left, my brother called. We weren't especially close, but we spoke from time to time, usually around holidays or when my mother was in the hospital for one thing or another. He said, "You know Dad's been telling people you're an admin?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "Like, he tells the neighbors you do desk work. Said something about you being stationed stateside 'cause you're not combat qualified." I didn't want to say anything, but yeah, that's when it hit me. This wasn't just emotional distance or gruff parenting. He was rewriting me. I had already completed 2 deployments in active war zones. I'd seen more action than most Marines my rank. I'd lost friends, attended funerals, written letters home to parents who never got to hold their kids again. And still, my father, retired, out of the fight for decades, was diminishing it. Not to me, but to others. Behind my back. I asked my mother about it. She waved it off. "Your father doesn't understand all these new roles in the military. Back when he served, women didn't. Well, it was just different." "He understands enough to lie," I said quietly. She didn't argue. The next time we visited, Mark tried again. Brought up football, politics, anything to build some kind of bridge. But the more effort he made, the more my father recoiled. Every question was met with a non-answer. Every compliment with a dismissive shrug. At dinner, he said to me, "So when are you gonna get out and do something real?" I blinked. "I'm in charge of logistics for half a fleet." "Yeah, but what does that mean, really?" he asked, cutting into his steak. "Spreadsheets." I don't remember what I said back. I just remember the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the way Mark put his fork down slowly, and the look my mother gave me across the table. She knew. She always knew. That night, I cried in the car on the way back to the hotel. I didn't want to, but it came out all at once. Not sobbing, just silent tears that kept coming while Mark drove. "Why does he hate me so much?" I whispered. Mark didn't answer right away. Eventually, he said, "I don't think he hates you. I think he doesn't know how to love what he doesn't understand." It should have helped. But it didn't. I stopped bringing up my promotions after that. I stopped sending updates. I still came around, still fixed things around the house when they needed it. But the relationship had changed. Or maybe I'd just stopped pretending it hadn't always been this way. The wedding plans moved forward. Small chapel, dress uniforms, limited guest list. A few of my Marines, a few of Mark's squadron buddies. My father didn't ask a single question. My mother sent back her RSVP late, then asked if we'd booked a hotel block. She didn't offer to help. He didn't mention it at all. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a group message from my brother. A neighbor had stopped him at the grocery store and said, "I didn't know Alex was getting married. Thought she was stationed overseas." Apparently, my father had told people I was too busy for a personal life. That I was probably staying in just to get the pension. that Mark and I had met at some training thing, but he didn't know if it was serious. The wedding invitations had gone out 2 months earlier. It was small, petty, unnecessary. But I felt it. Every time he erased me, it landed. Every time he dismissed me, it chipped away. I started to wonder if I even wanted him there. But some part of me still held on. Not because I thought he'd change, but because I needed to know once and for all that he wouldn't. And I would get that answer, loud, clear, and in front of 150 Marines. The wedding was held on base, in a modest white chapel near the harbor. Clean lines, natural light through stained glass, the scent of salt water barely drifting in through the open doors. No flowers, no choir. Just precision and quiet reverence. That was intentional. I didn't want extravagance. I wanted tradition, simplicity, and control. We'd built the ceremony around who we were. Mark wore his dress blues. So did I. No veil, no gown, just the uniform I'd earned, tailored crisp and precise. Our rings were carried by my godson, also in uniform. The sword arch was scaled down to 4 pairs. We wanted it sharp, not theatrical. The guest list was small. My commanding officer, Mark's squadron lead, a handful of Marines and airmen we trusted enough to see us on that day. My mother came. My brother flew in. My father, true to form, waited until the week of to RSVP. Not to me, but through my mother. She texted, "Your father will be attending. Just don't make a big deal about it. You know how he gets." I didn't respond. The morning of the wedding, I went for a run. Just 3 miles around base, headphones in, cap low. It wasn't about fitness. I needed to move, to breathe, to find that part of me that wasn't bracing for another blow. Mark texted while I was cooling down. "See you at the end of the aisle. You've already made this perfect." He always knew what to say without overreaching. By 1400, I was standing at the front of the chapel, facing the pews as people filtered in. I scanned the rows quickly. Officers in uniform, spouses in formal wear, a few family members clustered quietly. And then I saw him. Second pew aisle seat. Navy blazer, pressed slacks, the Marine Corps lapel pin he wore when he wanted to remind everyone who he used to be. Arms crossed. Neutral face. No reaction. My mother smiled weakly when she saw me. My brother gave me a slight nod. My father didn't move. I turned away and focused on the podium. The ceremony started. The chaplain kept it brief, as we requested. No long-winded homilies about love or patience. Just a reminder of commitment, honor, and mutual respect. Then it was time for our vows. Mark went first. His words were steady, genuine, and grounded in everything we'd survived together. He didn't cry. Neither did I. But the emotion in the room shifted when he said, "I choose you in storms, in silence, and in sacrifice. Always." Then it was my turn. I had written and rewritten my vows a dozen times. What I ended up with was short, clipped, and exactly me. I started speaking, eyes on Mark, focused only on him. And then, during the second sentence, I heard it. Laughter. Not loud, but loud enough. Just behind my left shoulder. A low, short scoff that cut through the air like static. My words caught, but only for a second. I kept going. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw heads turning. A few guests looked toward the source. I didn't. I already knew. "You'll never be anyone," he muttered. Always pretending. I didn't look at him. I kept speaking. My voice didn't shake, but my throat tightened. I couldn't feel my hands anymore, except for the pressure of Mark's fingers wrapped around mine. I finished the vows. Somehow. My eyes stayed locked on Mark's face. His jaw was clenched, but he didn't look away. He just nodded gently, as if to tell me to keep going. The chaplain moved on quickly, sensing the tension. He wrapped up the final blessing and announced us husband and wife. No kiss, we'd chosen the formal salute instead. I raised my hand, Mark mirrored me, and we held the pose for 2 full seconds before dropping it in unison. As we turned to face the chapel, I caught the expression I hadn't allowed myself to look at before. My father. Smirking. Arms crossed. Chin tilted slightly upward. Like he was watching a child perform in a school play. Amused, not impressed. Satisfied, even. Like he'd made his point. We exited through the sword arch, stepped out into the sunlight, and held our positions for photos and applause. Mark squeezed my hand once as we cleared the threshold, then let go and wrapped his arm around my waist. I leaned into him, nodded for the cameras, smiled as expected. Inside, the damage was still settling. I wasn't humiliated. That wasn't the word for it. It was something colder. Something more permanent. It wasn't just that he said it. It was that he said it there. Front row. My wedding. Surrounded by service members and friends and mentors who had shaped my life. He chose that moment, that sacred space, to voice the thing he'd always believed. That I was a fraud. That my rank, my service, my entire identity was performance. And he wanted me to hear it. Wanted them all to hear it too. At the reception, I kept it together. I shook hands. Thanked guests. Toasted with champagne. Mark kept one eye on me the whole time. He didn't press. He knew better. He also knew I wouldn't give my father the satisfaction of a scene. My dad stayed mostly silent during the reception. He didn't dance. Didn't mingle. Sat at a table near the back, sipping something dark and neat. My mother hovered. My brother kept checking the exits. At one point, my CO approached me near the catering table. "Hell of a ceremony," she said. Then, quieter, "Your father said something during your vows." I didn't quite catch it, but I shook my head. "Doesn't matter." She didn't press. But I saw the look in her eyes. She knew it did. Later, Mark pulled me aside, away from the music, the clinking glasses, the scattered laughter. "You want to talk about it?" "No, you want me to talk to him?" "Definitely not." He nodded once, then kissed my temple. "Okay." We rejoined the crowd. By the time the cake was cut and the final song played, my father had already left. No goodbye. No parting words. Just an empty seat at his table and a half-finished drink. My mother apologized for him as they were heading out. "He just doesn't handle emotions well. You know how he is." I nodded. "Yeah, I do." As they walked toward the parking lot, I watched her glance back twice. He didn't. Not once. Back inside, one of the youngest Marines in attendance approached me. Fresh out of school, wide-eyed, still getting used to the weight of his own name tape. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "That thing your dad said. I don't think he gets it. But we do. We see who you are." I just nodded. No words came out. Because the truth was, I hadn't just heard what he said. I had felt what it meant. Not a rejection of my career. A rejection of me. And for the first time, I knew, fully, clearly, and without doubt, that he wasn't capable of anything else. That it didn't matter what I achieved. In his eyes, I would always be pretending. The question now was whether I'd keep pretending he deserved a seat in my life. After the ceremony ended and the last of the formal photos were taken, I excused myself quietly and walked back into the bridal room. The chatter of guests blurred behind me, dulled by the heavy oak door as it clicked shut. Inside, the room was still. My reflection stared back at me from the full-length mirror in the corner, uniform perfect, hair pinned tightly under the service cover, not a single sign of the crack forming just beneath the surface. I didn't cry. I didn't move for a full minute. I just stood there, absorbing the aftershock of what had happened. Most people think betrayal is loud. That it screams when it happens. But it's not. Sometimes it whispers, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Sometimes it comes dressed in a navy blazer and lapel pin, sits in the second pew, and waits until you're the most exposed you've ever been before it strikes. 10 minutes. That's all I allowed myself. 10 minutes to feel the weight of every time I had driven hours just to stand in his kitchen fixing broken pipes while he acted like I wasn't even there. Every deployment I'd called home from, only for the line to go dead after 3 minutes because he was tired. Every medal that sat collecting dust in a box because there wasn't a single shelf at home where my achievements belonged. 10 minutes to realize that my father had made a choice again and again to see me as less. He had laughed during my vows. He hadn't stumbled. He hadn't slurred. It wasn't the alcohol. It was conviction. He meant every word. That wasn't a man caught off guard. It was a man who had always believed I was faking my way through something he considered sacred. Service. Rank. Respect. Authority. Things he claimed to value unless they belonged to me. I sat on the edge of the small love seat in the corner and leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. My gloves were still tucked into my belt, forgotten. My wedding ring felt heavier than it should have. The knock came lightly once. Then again, just a bit louder. My brother. I opened the door. He stepped in, hands in his pockets, suit a little rumpled like he'd just come from a work dinner. He didn't say anything at first. Just sat down beside me, leaned back, and exhaled through his nose. I heard him too, he said finally. I didn't reply. He's drunk, he added. Don't give it weight. He's always been like this, I said. My voice was steady, but it sounded like it belonged to someone else. The difference is this time, everyone saw it. He nodded slowly. Yeah, they did. There was a long pause. Then he said, Mom's trying to pretend she didn't hear it. She's saying maybe he was reacting to something else. He wasn't, I said. I know. We sat in silence for a few more minutes. I could hear the faint hum of conversation outside, muffled through the walls. Somewhere, someone was laughing, toasting, celebrating. You want me to say something to him? My brother asked. No, you sure? Completely. He stood up, smoothed his jacket, then hesitated. You don't deserve that. None of it. I looked up at him. I know. And I did. For the first time, I really did. After he left, I stayed seated for another 5 minutes. Not because I was shaken, but because I was recalibrating. Something had shifted. Something final. I had spent years shaping myself around what I thought he might eventually respect. Built a life around excellence, discipline, consistency, everything he once told me mattered. And it hadn't been enough. Not even close. So the question was, why had I kept trying? That night, after the last guests had left and Mark and I finally got a moment alone in the suite on base, he helped me out of my uniform in silence. There was no talk of what happened. Just a quiet kind of understanding that lived between us, a language we'd developed over years of service and sacrifice. I sat on the bed in a t-shirt, my dress shoes on the floor beside me. Mark stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He looked over at me and asked, Are you okay? Yeah, I said. I just don't think I'm going to pretend anymore. He tilted his head slightly. Pretend what? That he's going to change. That there's some version of me he's waiting to be proud of. Mark didn't reply right away. Then he walked over, sat beside me, and laced his fingers through mine. You don't owe him anything, he said simply. And I believed him. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. Have it. I pulled on sweats and walked the perimeter of the base, stopping at the overlook above the water. The air was still. Sky just starting to pinken. I stood there for a long time, arms crossed, and let myself be still in the knowledge that something had ended. Not the relationship. I'd known for a while that was already hollow, but the hope. The last time I had hoped he might surprise me, he opened his mouth during my vows and reminded me exactly who he'd always been. Back at the house later that morning, I found a note from my mother on the counter. Just a folded card with a short line, Please call us when you're ready. I left it unopened. I didn't call. Over the next few days, word spread. A few Marines who'd been there brought it up indirectly, checking in, saying how beautiful the ceremony had been. A couple even asked, Everything okay with your dad? I gave the same answer every time, he's just old school. But inside, something else was forming. Not resentment. Not anger. Just clarity. He wasn't going to change. And I didn't need to shrink myself anymore to make space for his discomfort. I didn't need to filter my accomplishments through a lens of humility just so he wouldn't feel threatened. I didn't need to keep making excuses for a man who had stopped seeing me the moment I stepped into my own. I didn't tell him off. I didn't write some long letter. I didn't post anything. I just stopped. Stopped calling. Stopped sending photos. Stopped waiting for a man who never planned to show up. And in that space, something better started to grow. Not peace. Not yet. But distance. And that was enough. For now. I hadn't originally planned on doing anything public at the reception. In fact, I'd specifically told Mark and our planning team to keep things simple, no first dance, no cake smash, no long-winded speeches. Just food, drinks, and good company. We were two officers who had already spent years in ceremonies. This one was for the people who had walked with us, served beside us, covered our six when it counted. But 3 weeks before the wedding, I added one note to the schedule. Just a small block after dinner, no more than 2 minutes. Honor call, command recognition. That's what it said on the printed programs, in small lettering under the reception timeline. Most wouldn't think twice about it. But those who needed to know did. It wasn't revenge. I didn't plan it to humiliate anyone. It wasn't a stunt or a speech or a viral moment. It was something I had earned. And it was mine. The reception hall was a repurposed mess hall on base, clean, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the coast. Round tables draped in navy linen. No centerpieces. Just challenge coins laid at each place setting, handpicked by me and Mark, commemorating our respective units. My father sat near the back, which I didn't ask for, but didn't fight either. He had stayed silent after the ceremony. No congratulations. No acknowledgement. I didn't approach him. Neither did Mark. We kept the program light, one toast from my commanding officer, another from Mark's best friend. People laughed, clinked glasses, passed around photos from deployment rotations and academy hazing rituals. For a while, it felt like the kind of evening I never allowed myself to imagine growing up. Easy. Safe. Mine. Then the music faded out, and I saw Sergeant Hughes walk to the side of the room in full dress blues. He didn't look at me, just nodded once toward the DJ. The mic was handed to him without a word. The room stilled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice clear and level, "please rise for a formal recognition of command." Chairs scraped quietly. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Some guests looked around, uncertain. Others, those in uniform, knew exactly what was coming. Sergeant Hughes stood tall, shoulders squared, then turned toward the head table. Then, loud enough to make the windows tremble, "Admiral on deck." The reaction was immediate. Every Marine in the room, nearly 150 of them, stood in unison and snapped into salute. The sound was crisp, practiced, thunderously quiet in its unity. Mark rose beside me. His hand went up, fingers at his brow. I stood slowly, turned to face them, returned the salute. No smile, no gloating, just precision, discipline, respect. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father rise, too. It was reflex. A response so deeply conditioned it bypassed thought. His hand went halfway up, then stalled. He looked around. And then he saw it. They weren't saluting the room. They weren't saluting tradition. They were saluting me. His arm dropped slowly. He didn't sit back down right away. For a moment, he just stood there, surrounded by men and women who recognized something in me that he never had. And then, like the blood drained from his face all at once, he sat. Hard. I held the salute a beat longer, then dropped it. The Marines did the same. No one clapped. That wasn't the point. The music picked back up. Conversations resumed. And, just like that, it was over. But not for him. He didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the night. My mother tried. I saw her lean in, whisper something. He shook his head. She gave up. At one point, my brother brought him a glass of water. He didn't touch it. I wasn't watching him exactly. But I didn't need to. You could feel the air shift around him, like gravity was slightly off-kilter in his orbit. After dinner, Mark and I moved from table to table. Marines came up one by one, offering congratulations, sharing stories, asking what came next. One young corporal said quietly, "Ma'am, that was the proudest I've ever felt wearing this uniform." I thanked him, shook his hand, and kept moving. Later that night, just before we were set to leave, my CO found me in the hallway outside the reception room. "I've known you 10 years, she said. And I've never seen you ask for a single spotlight. So when that call came, Admiral on deck, I knew it wasn't about the rank." "No," I said. "It wasn't." She nodded once. "But you should know," it landed. She didn't say on who. She didn't need to. When we got home that night, well past midnight, the stars sharp against the base skyline, I finally took off my uniform. Folded it with care. Set it aside. Mark came up behind me while I was tying back my hair. "Are you okay?" he asked. I turned, looked at him. "I think I am." "You don't regret it?" No, I said. Not for a second. The next morning, there was a voicemail from my mother. Short. Tight. I don't know what that was about, Alessia. But your father is disappointed. That felt like a stunt. I deleted the message without playing the rest. Because it wasn't a stunt. It was a line. And I had finally drawn it. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because I was done shrinking. Done explaining. Done pretending. He could think whatever he wanted. He could tell the neighbors I worked a desk job. He could rewrite the story for anyone who'd still listen. But he couldn't erase what happened in that room. He stood. He saw. He sat. And for the first time, he understood what I'd built, without his approval, without his support, without 1 ounce of help. There's a quiet kind of justice in that. One you don't need to celebrate. You just let it settle. And move on. Word moved faster than I expected. Within a week of the wedding, a short clip from the reception started making the rounds. It wasn't official footage, just a cell phone recording, slightly shaky, a little grainy, but clear enough. You could hear the moment Hughes called out, "Admiral on deck." You could see the entire room rise like a single breath. You could see me return the salute, steady and expressionless. And then, you could see my father, standing, confused, then slowly sitting down like the ground had shifted beneath him. I didn't post it. Someone else did. Probably one of the junior officers, most likely unintentional. But it took off. On base, in group chats, on Mill Twitter. Suddenly I was being tagged in comments. This is what earned respect looks like. That's how you reclaim your space. She didn't have to say a word. For a few days, my inbox flooded. Most of it was positive. A few people shared their own stories, parents who didn't show up, mentors who downplayed their promotions, voices they learned to stop waiting for. And then there were the messages I didn't expect. From strangers. From parents. One woman wrote, "My daughter is 14. She saw the video and asked me what it meant. I told her it meant that sometimes, the world has to be reminded who you are." She said, "I want to be like her when I grow up." Another read, "My son is training to be a Navy corpsman. He's surrounded by women like you and never realized how much harder they had to work to get the same salute. Thank you for showing him." I read every one. I didn't respond to most, but I kept them. Archived in a folder labeled Truth, for the days when doubt crept in. Meanwhile, from my father, nothing. Not a call. Not a text. Not even through my mother. Just silence. I half expected something. A sharp remark. A thinly veiled insult. Maybe even an outburst. But nothing ever came. The man who had always found something to critique, even if it was the way I parked the car or how I saluted in photos, had gone completely quiet. At first, I thought it might be the calm before the storm. That he was gathering his words, planning some kind of retaliation in the form of a cold comment at the next family gathering or a passive-aggressive email. But weeks passed. Then months. And it became clear it wasn't a pause. It was a withdrawal. He had seen something that day he couldn't unsee. And he didn't know what to do with it. So he chose nothing. And that, strangely, was the gift. For the first time, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped imagining what he would think when my name was announced at promotion boards. I stopped wondering if he'd finally come to one of my talks or show up at a commissioning event just to say, "That's my daughter." I stopped performing for an audience that never clapped. Instead, I got to work. That year, I was assigned to a joint command position overseas. Operational tempo was high, the pace brutal, but I was more focused than I had ever been. My reports went up clean. My team operated like a machine. Morale stayed high. We ran back-to-back missions without burnout, which caught the attention of higher-ups. They started asking how I managed to maintain cohesion under pressure. I told them the truth. I didn't talk down to my people. I didn't demand respect, I earned it. And I didn't tolerate small men with loud opinions. Somehow, word got back to the service academy I had trained through. They invited me to return as a guest speaker for the upcoming leadership seminar. I debated it, wasn't sure if I was ready to stand at the same podium where my instructors once lectured me about tone and bearing and not taking things too personally. But I went. The room was packed. Midshipmen, a few active duty staff, and some cadets from other branches. The topic they assigned me was respect and command. I smiled when I saw it. I didn't give them war stories. I didn't give them theory. I told them what it feels like to walk into a room full of people who see the bars on your collar, but not the work behind them. I told them about the invisible weights, the assumptions, the dismissals, the comments that come with too much familiarity and too little faith. And I told them about that wedding. About 150 Marines standing on cue, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Because they knew what I stood for. Because they'd seen me lead. Because the rank on my shoulders was backed by sweat, not favor. Afterward, a young woman, probably 20, maybe younger, came up to me, shaking slightly. My dad's army. I'm the only one in my family who joined the Navy. He still calls it the easy branch. Still says I should have gone the real route like he did. Hearing you today made me feel less alone. I told her what I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't owe him understanding if he's not willing to give you any in return. Build your own legacy. Let him catch up later if he can. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away straighter than when she'd arrived. I didn't mention my father during the speech. I never named him. But he was in the room, in the spaces between my words, in the silences I didn't fill. And I think that's the moment I realized I had outgrown the need to be seen by him. I was being seen by everyone else. For who I actually was. Not his daughter. Not his disappointment. Not his footnote. Just me. And the more I let go of him, the more space I had for others. I started mentoring more directly. Young officers, enlisted women thinking about OCS, even ROTC students trying to map out their first tours. I told them what the handbooks didn't. I told them how to stand taller than the slights. How to find your people. How to make your name mean something that no one else can dilute. One of my staff sergeants gave me a framed print at the end of our rotation. It had a photo of that reception moment, me mid-salute, and beneath it, a single line, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the room." I kept it on my desk. Still do. Not because I need the reminder, but because every time someone walks in and sees it, the conversation shifts. Respect can't be demanded. It can't be begged for. It can only be lived into. My father stopped calling. And for the first time, I didn't feel the ache of it. Because I had finally stopped calling back. It had been 8 months since the wedding when I got the card. No return address. Just his handwriting on the envelope, slanted, all caps, the same way he used to label boxes in the garage growing up. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I'd see it in the morning while I made coffee, ignore it, and then forget it was even there until dinner. On the 4th day, I opened it while standing in the doorway with my jacket still on. No message. Just a photograph. It was him, early 20s, in full dress uniform. Black and white. He looked too young for the scowl he was wearing. Nothing written on the back. No signature. No explanation. Just that photo. I stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what it was supposed to mean. Was it nostalgia? A reminder? An attempt at connection? Or just a way to say, this is who I was once. Don't forget. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. If anything, I felt removed. Like I was looking at a stranger who happened to have my last name. I slid the photo back into the envelope and walked to my desk. Pulled out a blank card. Wrote one sentence. I'm not angry. I just stopped waiting. No salutation. No name. Just the truth. I dropped it in the mailbox the next morning. Didn't check to see when it was picked up. Didn't wonder if he'd write back. And he didn't. Not for another 4 months. When he finally did, it wasn't a letter. It was a phone call. I missed it. Saw the missed call while reviewing logistics reports in my office. Same number he's had since I was a teenager. No voicemail. I didn't call back that day. I waited. 3 days later, he tried again. This time, I answered. The conversation lasted under 5 minutes. He asked how I was. I said fine. He said he saw something about my new posting in the base newsletter. Congratulations, he added, like it was a line someone had handed him to read. I said thanks. He asked how Mark was. I said he was well. Then there was silence. Not heavy, not awkward, just a clear marker that the call was done. Well, he said. I'll let you go. I said, all right. Take care. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. No mention of the wedding or the salute or the months of silence that followed. Just a brief exchange between two people who used to share more. I didn't feel moved by it. But I didn't feel cold either. I felt neutral. And that, for me, was progress. In the weeks that followed, we didn't talk again. He didn't call. I didn't write. And I didn't feel the usual pull to bridge the gap. Something had shifted. Not in him, but in me. I no longer looked for signs of recognition. No longer checked for his name on holidays or scanned the crowd at award ceremonies wondering if he'd surprised me. He was background now. Still there, but no longer shaping the narrative. It's not that I hate him. I don't. Hate would take energy I'm no longer willing to give. But I don't invite him in either. He's not part of my validation loop. Not part of my decision-making. Not part of the story I tell when people ask how I became who I am. If someone mentions him, usually my mother, occasionally my brother, I listen. But I don't engage. I don't ask follow-up questions. I don't take the bait. And over time, even they've stopped expecting me to. The last time I saw him in person was at my cousin's retirement party. A civilian gathering, casual. He was seated near the back, drink in hand, surrounded by old friends who knew him before he was a father. He nodded when he saw me. I nodded back. That was the extent of it. Later, someone tried to pull us into the same conversation, some nostalgic story about a holiday gathering when I was 10. I smiled, made a polite comment, then excused myself. Not with resentment. Just clarity. I've spent most of my adult life learning how to be direct, efficient, strategic. How to lead without grandstanding. How to move rooms without raising my voice. But this was a different kind of discipline, knowing when not to engage. When to let the silence be the answer. It's not dramatic. It's just clean. Every now and then I'll get a birthday card or a photo. Nothing handwritten beyond "Love, Dad." I keep them in a drawer, not because they matter, but because they remind me how far I've come. From the little girl in JROTC hoping he'd clap when she marched, to the officer who stood straight-backed in front of 150 Marines and reminded him, and everyone else, who she had become. Without his help. Without his praise. Without needing anything more than what she earned. We don't rebuild in the way most people expect. There's no big confrontation. No teary apologies. No sweeping resolution. There's just space. Boundaries. Decisions made quietly and upheld consistently. I let him exist in that space. And I let myself move beyond it. It's been 4 years. For years since that moment in the reception hall, since the sharp snap of 150 salutes sliced through the quiet and reset the story I'd spent most of my life trying to rewrite. I wear 2 stars now. Rear Admiral. It's strange how fast the climb feels in hindsight. At the time, it was slow. Every promotion earned with sleep-deprived rotations, post-op briefings that blurred into each other, leadership evaluations that dissected you like you were machinery. But now, when I look back, it's all compressed into a handful of moments that define the direction, one hard choice at a time. One standard held. One truth spoken, even when it wasn't welcome. And, strangely, the moment that gets brought up the most wasn't in any official capacity. It wasn't a mission or an operation or a command decision. It was that wedding. I've spoken at 3 graduation ceremonies since then. Each time, someone approaches afterward, usually a young woman, sometimes a parent, and asks, carefully, quietly, did it really happen like that? The salute? The room standing? It did. Every second of it. And sometimes, I think that's what made it matter even more. That it wasn't staged. That I didn't script it or announce it. It was something we did for ourselves, and everyone else just happened to witness it. The most common follow-up is, what did your father do? And my answer is always the same, exactly what you'd expect. He still lives in the same house. Still sits in the same chair in the living room. Still drinks the same brand of coffee every morning like it's sacred. I'm told he brings out his old uniform on occasion. Shows photos of himself in his prime. Mentions, when it's relevant, that his daughter's in the Navy too. But he doesn't say my name with pride. He doesn't tell the full story. He tells his version. In that version, I think he's still the main character. The war veteran. The tough love father. The man who raised a daughter into discipline, into rank, into some form of reluctant success. I don't fight it anymore. I used to want to correct people. Used to want the truth documented, footnoted, clarified. I thought justice meant the story had to be publicly right. But that's not justice. That's control. And I stopped chasing control the day I realized that being respected isn't the same as being understood. People respect me now. Not because I demand it. Not because of what's on my collar. But because of what I've done. Because of how I move. Because of what I stand for and, more importantly, what I won't stand for. I mentor differently now, too. Early on, I used to give the standard advice: work harder, speak up, lean in. But over time, I learned to listen more than I talk. I learned that what young officers need isn't another checklist. They need to hear that it's okay to outgrow the people you once sought approval from. That being overlooked doesn't mean you're invisible. And that sometimes, the people who doubt you the loudest are the ones most threatened by what you might become. One of my ments, a junior officer named Santiago, asked me recently, "How do you know when you've made it?" I told her, when you no longer need someone else's permission to be proud of yourself. She nodded slowly, like she was still wrapping her mind around it. Then she said, "That day in the reception hall, do you ever wish he'd stood and clapped instead?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said I used to. But that would have been about him. That moment wasn't. Because that moment, those 150 Marines rising in unison, wasn't about revenge. It wasn't a reckoning. It was a recognition. It was about being seen. Fully, plainly, without compromise. Not by the man who refused to see me, but by the people who did. By those who had watched me lead in the field. Who had followed my orders because they trusted I knew what I was doing. Who had seen me get blood on my boots and grease on my hands, and still show up the next day with a command plan that worked. People who didn't care that I wasn't the person my father imagined. Because they knew exactly who I was. And that has shaped the legacy I care about. I don't want to be remembered for the wedding moment. I want to be remembered for what came after. For the officers I backed when they were afraid to speak. For the sergeants I shielded when they took the fall for someone else's mistake. For the junior staff I promoted not because of timing, but because they were ready, long before anyone gave them credit. I want to be remembered for showing up the same way every time, no matter who is in the room. Consistent. Sharp. Unapologetically qualified. And maybe, in the quiet margins of someone else's story, I already am. I'll probably never get a real apology from my father. No clear admission. No moment where he finally says, "I was wrong about you." But that's fine. Because I was never wrong about me. And I've stopped needing his voice to echo that back. That's the thing no one tells you about growing up, especially growing up under someone else's shadow. Eventually, you realize the light was never behind them. It was always in you. You just had to stop waiting for permission to turn it on. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth, no matter how much you gave? Did they ever come around, or did you have to move on without them? Drop your story in the comments. I read every one. And if this hit home for you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the loudest revenge is silence.